Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cyngns channel, unifying robotaxi-level autonomous driving software, off-the-shelf leading hardware, and precise analytics to deliver the first of its kind autonomous solutions for industrial fleets. Joining us, the VP of Business Development, we've got Ben here, who's going to be giving us some clerical insight into the broad view today of basically autonomy. So first and foremost, welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to get you on. I love picking your brain. You have a lot of knowledge beyond what most people probably consider is going on in the autonomy space. And I kind of want to kick this off with, first and foremost, your thoughts on self-driving, because I mean, the first thought that comes to mind would perhaps be Tesla, Google. I know GM and a lot of the auto companies are kind of evolving into that, but people are like not paying attention to where the real evolution is happening a lot faster, which are some of the sectors you're approaching, whether it's mining, warehousing. I wouldn't mind if you could just give us some insights, not only into those sectors and what people might be unaware of, but some of the challenges you're perhaps facing and just some of the lesser known details about the true scale and what's going on in the autonomy sector.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing right now in autonomy is what many would consider, a winter, or sort of the trough of disillusionment, as it's called in the adoption cycle. So I think if you go back to some of those big names that you mentioned, the Waymos, the Teslas, the Auroras, that had a whole lot of tailwind behind them. If you go back 7 or 8 years, it was when billions of dollars of VC funding started pouring into what we began calling mobility, but really you could consider automotive, which was never an interesting segment for venture capital investment because of how long it takes to break into that difficult, that safety oriented of a market. We're seeing the reservations that people forgot about because the hype got generated. We're seeing those reservations now come to fruition and remind us why it's a very difficult area to be a startup in. So just this week, again, Waymo, ostensibly one of the leaders in the space, just did a second round of layoffs. There was a press release about it. And I bring it up because I think there was a particularly interesting sentence in there that captured a lot of what I thought about how this industry how it would progress several years ago when I was more focused on road vehicles. And that sentence is that a lot of autonomy engineers are now becoming ADAS engineers, at least for a while, right? So ADAS, of course, is advanced driver assistance systems. It's what we've come to know as strictly highway autopilot, which autopilot is Tesla's term, but Mercedes, Nissan, GM, practically all the OEMs, Audi, they all have what we'd call level 2 lane keeping and adaptive cruise control, which is what everybody's working on now. And there's a whole lot of value in that, because if you think about your commute to work, maybe you spend 90% in bumper to bumper traffic, and that's where you derive the most value. And it's a flipped kind of problem. That problem is generally easier to solve than that remaining 10% of what happens between my house and the on-ramp and the off-ramp and my office. That remaining 10% is why we're seeing push outs year over year. It's why you can't call these systems level 4. You can only call them level 2 plus, level 3. But really, we as consumers derive a ton of value from that 90% that is automated, so that you can relax, you can take a load off. You don't take your eyes off the road yet. You don't sleep, but you can reduce your mental strain for sitting in 40 minutes of bumper to bumper traffic on the way to work. So I think seeing that from Waymo really encapsulated what is happening in the last year or two. Same thing with Argo shuttering, with a lot of those engineers going over to Ford to work on production ADAS systems, as opposed to somewhere on the horizon, L4 robotaxi swarms running through cities. And I'll pause there for a second because it's a segue into the second part of your question. I want to see if you wanted to interject first. It's a little bit different when you look at the domains that we're working in, which is those industrial domains, and I can juxtapose those a little bit.
Yeah, if you don't mind, give us a little idea into that, and then I'm going to kind of make you put you on the spot when it comes to kind of future expectations. But yeah, talk about these sectors a little bit. I'd love to hear it.
Sure. So what I just described, that, I just called it 90% and 10%, but really that Pareto is probably even closer to a 95.5. You could even argue that in certain cases it's a 99.1 in terms of the complexity versus how much of the problem you can solve and how much additional work remains to solve to get to 100%. The problem with the road vehicle space is that those remaining corner cases are, I won't say intractable, but damn near it, because you simply can't predict every problem under the sun. I mean, practically anything when you're out in the world can occur. And I used to get funky questions when I was on panels for road vehicles about, well, how's your perception system? How's the vehicle going to react when it sees, there's more normal things. There's, a tire in the middle of the road with a black garbage bag next to it in the middle of the road. And how do you know which one you can drive over and which one you can't? Very difficult problem, one that's easy for us to envision because it is a real problem that we encounter. Then you have your completely unexpected things happening, like kids running out from behind cars. That's one that's brought up all the time, obviously, because of the tragedy that would be involved in getting that wrong. And then you get some really screwy off the wall ones, which I think illustrates the point. I got asked on a panel, what would your system do if an old lady in a wheelchair was chasing her pet chicken across the road, trying to smack it with her umbrella? Right. And so that's just a collection of random things that the point is you can think of practically any combination of these random things. And that's a thing that you need to be able to account for if you're out on the open road where you have practically zero control over the environment around you. And that's exactly where the most significant difference lies in the domains that we at Cyngn target, which is to say, in the jargon, what you would call a geofenced domain. What that really means is that it's private. Our customers own and operate the sites that we're on. They only have trained personnel interacting with our vehicles, so you don't get random people running out. I've seen videos in San Francisco of drunk guys coming out of bars in the middle of the night and jumping in front of autonomous vehicles to see if they'll stop. Congratulations on attempting for your Darwin Award, but not the type of thing we as autonomous vehicle developers want to know rests on our shoulders and could go the wrong way. Not going to get that when you're driving 5 miles per hour or less in a manufacturing facility, in a warehouse that has very structured rules. But sometimes we even have autonomous capabilities that our customer tells us, no, because of OSHA or because of some other regulation, we actually can't do that, right? Like we'll say, hey, our vehicles, they don't need to just stop and call for help. If something's in their way, let's say somebody left a pallet in their way, we can actually navigate around and they'll say, no, absolutely not. You'll stop, you will call for help, somebody will remove that pallet because that's how our site operates. And that really shows you the difference between working with a customer, working with trained personnel, working at lower speeds, which also reduces the cost and how far you need to see and the impact on compute and sensors, which goes a long way to the unit economics. All of those things just put us in a position where those near intractable problems become very well-known problems. We don't run into a lot of unknown unknowns in the types of environments that we work in. And when we do see some gap, because still sites are unique and it's not all, if it was that easy, autonomous vehicles would have been running around all over the place 20 years ago when automation in industrial spaces first started, and that's not the case. Less than 1% of material handling vehicles that ship every year are autonomous. So still a whole lot of pie to take over there. But still, the nature of those problems, the severity if something goes wrong, the types of fail-safe maneuvers that we can take in the event that you do encounter an unknown corner case, we can slam the brakes and stop, go from 3 miles per hour to 0 miles per hour as quickly as we can, which you don't get to do if you're driving down a highway at 70 miles per hour. You don't get to say panic mode, slam the brakes and try to pull over in the shoulder. So those are, I think, the most significant differences as to why we're unfortunately seeing the under delivery in the road vehicle space, which again, I'm very passionate about. And I'm looking forward to the future where we do have more autonomous vehicles out on the roads, but there's a reason why we're able to deploy vehicles today with paying customers, and that's not really the case yet out on the public roadways.
Yeah, now I want to kind of put you on the spot here about a kind of future expectations, and then I want to drive down a little bit more into Cyngn. But I mean, you watched the Investor Day with Tesla there, and I would just find it intriguing about the optimism behind, when self-driving is going to become prominent. And I mean, it's been a promise every year. I think even last year he said it'd be ready by the end of the year. I mean, Google Waymo is trying to build those data sets for very particular areas. I mean, they've been testing self-driving. We've seen them when we went to San Francisco. But when they're kind of building these data sets, I mean, we're seeing Facebook get involved with all these mega supercomputers. I mean, from your timeline perspective and just kind of your honest opinion about it, how long do you think it would realistically take? Maybe not to full commercialization, but to kind of a ready level where somebody could just sit in the back seat and comfortably have little to no concern whatsoever. How long do you think that data could build out for before we actually start seeing like true full level autonomy?
The good news is that we are seeing it, with the caveat being that it's fairly constrained. So Waymo has started to give completely, unsupervised, no safety driver rides in Chandler, Arizona. I believe there have been some close followers in some other areas among Cruise and some others. So we're starting to see it in these little pockets. That's great because it's proving that it's not, is this possible at all? It is possible, but it's also problematic because there's a fairly significant quantum leap from that sort of constrained autonomous deployment into a truly value generating autonomous deployment. Because and this is where I think I think Tesla's doing wonderful things. Elon Musk said something that I absolutely agree with, which is that in my eyes, Tesla is one of the companies, if not the company, best applying AI to real world products that's out there today. And I'm a little biased. They acquired my last company into their autopilot division. So, but I agree with that. The problem is, I think, when you start to unpack how that product would be used and what product is it that you're actually offering when you talk about autonomous vehicles. And what I mean is, why do we want autonomous vehicles, right? We don't, it's not like we can't get places in the world that we live in today. We have this desire to have lower cost transportation, but we're nowhere near that today. Autonomous vehicles of today are more expensive per mile than your Uber or your taxi or your bus or whatever it is. And that's a really difficult competition, especially in urban areas where there's a reason cities subsidize bus routes. It's people's incentive is, how do I get from point A to point B in the cheapest way possible? So you don't have much of an opportunity to win customers on value, on experience. Now, when you go into the more of the black car side of things, sure, that exists there, but that's where you have people who prefer vehicle ownership. They like to own the asset that they sit in, that they drive in, that is theirs, that they know some random person didn't just sit in before them. So it starts to expose to you that not only is there this very difficult technical challenge, but that to reach the masses, you have to get costs down to, practically zero. I mean, you have to get the numbers that are touted it's got to reach a cost of 10 cents to 25 cents a mile to like truly take over the world, which is very, very far from where things are today. So then you're left, well, what about the niche of people who, okay, then what product are you delivering? Techies who think it's novel to sit in a car that drives itself, or who just are really introverted and don't like people and don't want to have a person sitting in the front of their car. That's a fairly small market to be able to go after. And when you then look at, well, you're constraining your demographic, but not only are you constraining your demographic, because we just talked about, you're actually constraining the geography that you can address that demographic in. So now you're only able to give these rides in, let's say, Chandler, Arizona, or maybe a few other developed areas where they feel that they've reached this proven solution. And then within that, until they cross the cost threshold, they have a very limited niche of people that they can address in this already limited niche of geography. That's where some of these problems that you start to ask, Ooh, okay. It's one thing to be able to give some rides autonomously, because I do think we're there. It's another thing to live in the utopian future that people started talking about 6 or 7 years ago, where teenagers don't need to get driver's licenses anymore.
Yeah, I think that was a really good good way at answering the question without answering the direct timelines. Because I think when it comes to the valuation, when people, put values on these companies, the question is time horizon, right? Like if you're going to put really high multiples on companies based on these future expectations, is it going to take 10 or 20 years? I mean, if you're in your 40s or 50s, that might be a little bit longer than you might have to wait if you're leading into something like retirement, which makes me want to lead into the next question when it comes to Cyngn specifically. What do you guys see over 2023 and thereafter with currently what you're working on?
For us, this is where it's distinctly different from the road vehicle space. So we have commercially released our solution for stock chasers, which if you don't know, it kind of looks like a tricycle on steroids for the type of work vehicle. It's a big metal machine, can tow 6,000 pounds. You can load stuff directly onto it. So it works everywhere from manufacturing facilities to postal offices to distribution centers. So that is commercially released for us. So we're working with our OEM partners, specifically the Columbia Vehicle Group we work very closely with, to now put those into sales mode, get as many of them out into the world on licensed commercial deployments as possible. And that's different. And the reason that we can do that is to bring up the issue that I brought up before with the road vehicles. It's one thing to work in Chandler, Arizona, but we know the big markets for robotaxis are going to be, where you have densely populated areas. So New York, San Francisco, right, big city centers. Those are vastly different from one another. They're even different in their driving laws, styles, road markings, complicated. For us, those differences are much smaller, especially when you work within a particular company. So a customer of ours, for example, the way they manufacture engine parts in Mexico is going to be very similar to how they manufacture engine parts in the Chicago area, right? So that for us is a gap that's much easier to bridge, and allows us to scale, which is why we're going into that sales mode with the stock chasers. It's basically just part of the deployment process. Get there, map it. Is there anything unique about the map? Address that. Great. Vehicle drives the same way as it would have at the other site. And in parallel, we're bringing up those next vehicles that then kind of live in that same paradigm of the types of sites that they work in, the ODDs that they operate in, but they might have some unique new needs, which is why we see them as a separate commercial release, each of these vehicles. So we're currently bringing up a forklift, right? So we have to nail down the computer vision element of detecting the pallets, then stabbing the pallets. That's a different type of downstream function from everything's the same up until mapping, but downstream to perception, decision making, planning and controls, that looks different in many regards than it does from a vehicle that's just driving around towing things. But that's what we're doing in parallel to these commercially released, go into sales mode until those cross a threshold. And then that portfolio of vehicles that we can sell as commercial releases that don't require additional R&D to get over the line, that portfolio continues to increase, which means we go back to then what's the next vehicle? What customer is validating what the next vehicle that we should do is, or what's a big chunk that if we had that in our portfolio, we'd be even to win, even more dollar opportunities with the customers that we already have, let alone attract new customers who had a need that we just didn't have time to address yet or couldn't address yet with the vehicles that we had already released on our enterprise autonomy suite. And that's the interplay between why and how we can sell today, and then how that continues to get strengthened over time with kind of that flywheel effect of new vehicles go to sale mode, new vehicle go to sale mode.
Well, I definitely appreciate these insights. I think they're very fruitful and probably a pretty exciting topic for many of the viewers. So I'll pass the question off to you guys. We'd love to know what you think in that comment section below. Consider subscribing because as news continues to come down the wire, we're going to update you here. But on that note, as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.